Welcome to Nightmares and Grief, a place to explore and celebrate the darkness. Each episode, I'll read stories written by me, Derrick Heisey. So settle in, check under the bed, and pour a drink for the skeletons in your closet. It's time to start. Kids these days.
Jessica sent the big metal filing cabinet's drawer rattling shut with a reverberant thum. She locked away the student's working files, tucking a lock of red hair behind her ear, and heaved a satisfied smile. What a day. What a good day. David had finally mastered two-digit subtraction after 3 weeks of struggling. Marissa had gone an entire day without a meltdown. Jessica lived for these small victories that most teachers might overlook, the halting progress of children who'd been labeled difficult or impossible by others. She'd always been drawn to the ones others had given up on. They needed the most love. Her classroom reflected that philosophy, every space designed with intention. The calm-down corner with its weighted blankets and fidget toys, vocabulary cards adorning the walls arranged by theme rather than alphabetically because that's how her students processed information best. Desks arranged in small pods rather than rows, fostering collaboration while minimizing distractions. The classroom was dark now, the winter evening having stolen the daylight hours ago. In the windows, she could only see her own reflection, still fresh-faced at 35, though tiny lines began to form at the corners of her green eyes from years of animated expressions.
You know you don't get paid extra for staying late, right?
Jessica steadied herself against the filing cabinet and pressed a hand against her chest. Principal Nolan, she gasped. The man chuckled, shaking his big, bald head. It looked too big for his lank body. His wrinkled skin sank in on the bones. That's all he seemed to be.
It's dawn, he said with a smile that was soft and affectionate like a low fire on a winter evening. I'm not going to tell you again.
Jessica glanced at the floor and then back up. She nodded. Okay. Don Nolan pointed at the little round Bluetooth speaker.
What's the music?
Oh, it's Sin Bandera. I picked it up when I did my student teaching in New Mexico. It means without a flag in Spanish.
It's pretty.
She smiled. Yeah, it is.
Do you understand it?
Jessica nodded. There was peace as they stood there for a while and listened. The space between them didn't feel empty because the music poured into it, filling it like water, and they floated in the soft, bright light of guitar and piano. The song faded, and Don said,
Go home, Jessica. It's late, and you're still working. You'll burn yourself out.
What are you doing here, then?
I'm going home, and I'm going to set the alarm. Do you know how to disengage it?
Jessica shook her head.
Then you should leave, too. Come quick. I'm not going to give you enough time to get any work to bring with you.
The winter had been cold. Outside the school, their feet crunched against the new layer of snow that had fallen since all the cars left. Dawn looked at the sky and seemed to watch the thin, white fistfuls of flakes.
You've done amazing work, Jessica.
His words lit a candle in her heart, and her soul glowed. Dawn shivered and buttoned up his coat.
I've been at this school longer than anyone. 31 years now. I've seen hundreds of teachers pass through these halls. The ones with your kind of dedication. He trailed off, glancing at the falling snow.
For just a moment, Jessica thought she saw something flicker across Dawn's face. Not just weariness, but a deeper knowing, as if he were privy to some terrible secret. Jessica's grandfather had fought in Vietnam, and he would often stare blankly into the distance, his eyes fixed on atrocities from the past. She wondered if Don was a veteran, as his eyes bore the same preoccupied expression. What about them? Jessica asked at last. Don returned his eyes to her.
They burn the brightest, but flames that bright don't last.
He cleared his throat.
It's true. You're the kind of teacher they make a movie about after she dies.
The words hung in the air between them, heavier than Don might have intended. Jessica shifted, lost for words.
Enjoy winter break, Jessica. We're getting a new transfer student next semester.
Jessica bulked. A transfer student? Mid-year? Don nodded.
Don't worry about it. We don't even have all the paperwork yet. We just know she has an IEP and will be working with you.
He furrowed his brow.
Careful with this one. There's something about her file that doesn't add up. Records show a previous school, but when I call, they claim no student by that name ever attended.
Jessica broke out in a cold sweat despite the frigid temperature. She told herself it was because she wished she had advanced heads up so she could prepare over the break. What's their name? She stammered. Don nodded, and Jessica swore she caught him grimace.
Her name is Vezka. Vezka Nevelka.
Without another word, Don turned and headed to his car. He didn't even glance over his shoulder when he waved her goodbye. Jessica took it as her cue to leave and enjoy winter break. Yet, as she trudged to her car, she found herself repeating the name in her mind. Vezka Nevelka. Vezka Nevelka. She didn't know why, but the name felt wrong in her mouth, like trying to pronounce words from a language never meant for human tongues. As she reached for her car door, Jessica caught her reflection in the window. For just a split second, so brief she might have imagined it, she thought she saw someone else staring back at her. A woman with the same features, but much older. Her hair streaked with silver, dark circles pooling beneath her eyes. Jessica blinked, and the vision vanished. Just fatigue, she told herself. She needed this break more than she realized. Yet, as she drove home through the thickening snow, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. That some invisible clock had begun ticking down to an event she couldn't yet imagine. It had snowed through December, and it was still snowing now. Everything was white. Even though the sun couldn't be seen anywhere through the thick gray blanket of clouds, the whiteness was so total that it gave the impression of a bright day. Like Russian soldiers waiting in trenches for Germans, the teachers of Creekview Elementary School lined the pavement in front of the brick building. They hugged their coats tighter, shivering, bouncing, gripping warm travel mugs with steam rising from their mouths, catching up with one another. No one had done very much for Christmas break. The women had opted to stay home with their families. Some of them prepared things for lessons, though most of them hadn't. I needed a break popped up often in conversation between sips of coffee. It was inevitably greeted with one or two knowing nods. They left Jessica alone. She had a big grin on her face. She held an umbrella above her head. "Welcome back," read the sign she held at her chest. "We missed you." It was blue foam core lined with yellow construction paper stripes, the school colors, and had a shiny black border. The letters were embossed plastic, glued with meticulous care. Savannah Steelman, a second-year kindergarten teacher new to Creekview, beamed at it when she first saw it and said it was cute. No one else commented on it. "I needed a break," Miss Harmon said, the phrase popping up for the third time in the teacher's brief conversation. It was inevitably greeted with knowing nods from the others. "You'll need more than a break someday, honey," Mrs. Yates added, eyeing Jessica's welcome sign with a mixture of amusement and pity. Her weathered face mapped the territory Jessica had yet to traverse. 20 years of teaching etched into the corners of her eyes and mouth. You can't save them all, you know. Some kids just can't be reached, no matter how much energy you pour into them. From across the sidewalk, Chandra Brown glanced over at Jessica's sign with a scowl. The hard, stocky woman in a bell-shaped floral print dress had a reputation for strict discipline that bordered on harsh, yet her students consistently showed the highest improvement in test scores. Her short, dark brown hair sprang out to the sides of her head like the crest of a prehistoric lizard issuing a challenge. Some of them aren't meant to be reached, Chandra muttered just loud enough to be heard. Some of them are just taking what they can get from you. Melanie Winters, a second-year art teacher, broke from another group to admire Jessica's sign. Her youthful enthusiasm hadn't yet been worn down, her bright blue eyes still lighting up at the creative project. This is wonderful. I wish I had your energy and creativity, she said. The kids are lucky to have you. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, not yet sanded down by years in the classroom. Jessica beamed at the rare encouragement. Thanks. I'm especially excited to meet our new transfer student. I wanted her to feel welcome right away. New student? Mid-year? Melanie brushed a strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear. As Jessica explained about Vezka, a strange sensation crept over her, like cold fingers trailing down her spine. For just a moment, the winter air seemed to grow colder, the sky darker. She faltered mid-sentence. You okay? Melanie asked, concerned. Fine, Jessica replied, shaking off the feeling. Just someone walking over my grave. Melanie's brow furrowed. That's an odd expression. My grandmother used to say that. Mine too, Jessica murmured, though she couldn't actually remember ever hearing it before. The words had simply appeared in her mind, fully formed. Down the road, the buses began as pinpricks of yellow that grew larger and larger, a single file line crawling down the pavement like a blind column of ants. Their low, hungry growls filled the air when they pulled up to the curb, and exhaust fumes filled the gaps between snowflakes. The diesel's sour stench made Jessica cough. One by one, the bus doors flapped open with tired, erratic creaks, and children spilled out. Their small bodies erupted from the narrow throat with the energetic chaos of exploding stars. Jessica's eyes lit up. She searched for her kids. They found her in batches, waving at her, some of them swooping in for a hug with a quick conversation about how excited they were about seeing her in groups again. Then their regular classroom teachers would call for them and they would hover for a moment or two, only peeling themselves off of Jessica after she gave them a nod, smile, and gentle encouragement to go. Their eyes still glittered when they lined up with their regular classes, and Jessica caught them casting looks back with little bashful grins. Asher Melton hung back, his solemn brown eyes watching Jessica from beneath a fringe of dark hair. Unlike the other children, he didn't rush forward for a hug, but his gaze followed her with an intensity that felt almost protective. He was small for 8, with a quietness that sometimes made teachers forget he was in the room. Jessica had spent the fall coaxing him out of his shell, discovering a keen intelligence behind his silence. Hi, Asher, she called, waving to him. He raised a hand in return, the corner of his mouth twitching in what passed for his smile. Then he turned and joined his line without a word. The buses left, and the parents left too. Around Jessica, the children walked back to school in unsteady lines while their teachers gently retaught them how not to talk or touch or get distracted. Soon, the sidewalk was cleared and the parking lot was filled with nothing but sedans, minivans, and dirty snow. All of it belonged to the teachers. Jessica stood on tiptoes as if it would help her see down the road better. It didn't. "Still waiting for your transfer student?" Melanie asked, pausing at the door. "Yes," Jessica sighed. "I made a special welcome packet." "Well, don't freeze out here. She'll find a way," Melanie said with a smile. From the empty view blew a sharp, cold wind that knocked a few strands of red hair out of Jessica's curly ponytail and across her face. She pushed them back behind her, focusing on the distance. Empty white stretched out on either side, broken only by the few houses scattered around. Creekview was out of the way, nested on the outskirts of town. If a car was on its way, she could see them coming against the clean snow. When Jessica finally entered the building, her thoughts were buried outside under the snow, pondering where her transfer student could be and disappointed that she couldn't give her a proper Creekview greeting. The touch on her elbow was so slight, so thin, like spiders' feet on sleeping cheeks, that Jessica almost thought she'd imagined it, but it was enough to jerk her mind out of the snow and into the strange warmth of the front office. She shrieked and dropped her sign, and Don stepped back with his hands raised.
"Sorry, Jessica, I didn't mean to scare you. You didn't seem to hear me when I said your name."
She shook her head and averted her eyes. She felt her cheeks flush. "No, I didn't. Sorry."
"It's okay. Is everything all right?"
"Yes, I was expecting Vezka to come with the other children, and it made me a little sad when she didn't."
"The transfer student? She's in the office. She just arrived."
Jessica shot a glance out of the wide glass face of the school, but nothing had changed since she entered. "How did she—" Jessica turned to Dawn, waiting for an answer, but it seemed apparent that the question was not implicit. "I guess she's taking the bus now?" Dawn shook his head. He seemed confused.
"No, we never received transfer forms.
Valerie assumed that you'd sent her in. I was coming out to find you." Valerie Edwards, the school secretary, sat at her long gray desk, fingers clacking over her keyboard with metronomic precision. Her steel gray bob and wire-framed glasses gave her the appearance of a woman who'd mastered the art of efficient disinterest. She could process a field trip permission slip, comfort a sick child, and deflect an angry parent, all while maintaining the same neutral expression. 27 years at Creekview had honed her ability to be simultaneously helpful and emotionally unavailable. After a little pause, Jessica smiled and laughed a little and shook her head. "I want to see Vezka. She must be so confused."
She's doing okay."
Beside Valerie's desk sat the transfer student. She'd taken off her coat and folded it over her backpack, but she looked as if she'd been dumped headfirst into the snow. Her blonde hair hung past her narrow, angular shoulders in bedraggled clumps reminiscent of a lost wet dog. Her legs, roach-like, dangled off the chair and above the ground. She swung them, vigorous, impatient, from swollen knees, each patched with band-aids. She stared out of the window with blank, glassy eyes. Jessica leaned over, hands on her thighs, and smiled. "Vezka?" Vezka's head snapped to face Jessica, but her eyes didn't follow right away, almost like they were free-floating inside a jar. Her gaze slid up Jessica's body, over her throat and face, and landed on her pupils. First, her lips parted as if she were awed beyond reason by Jessica's presence, and then the little girl's jaw went slack like a dumb waiter let loose, as if she forgot to keep the muscles tense, and before long, her mouth was open wide. Jessica's smile didn't waver. She'd seen disabilities like this before and knew that it was important not to bring attention to Vezka's physical uniqueness. "Vezka, darling, how are you?" she asked. Something about the girl's vacant stare triggered a memory Jessica couldn't quite place. A fragment of a dream, perhaps, where she'd seen those same empty eyes staring back at her. A strange doubling sensation came over her, as if this moment had happened before, or would happen again. Vezka seemed to slip back into reality. She closed her mouth, wiped drool off her chin with the sleeve of her striped shirt. "Vezka, hungry," she oozed. Valerie, the secretary, raised her hands to defend against the edge of Jessica's glare. "I offered her breakfast. The same hot breakfast all the other kids get. She didn't want it." Of course not. The food was terrible. Vezka wanted real food, no doubt. Jessica rooted through her purse for the small emergency apple. "Here you go, Vezka. Here's some food." The ropes of Vezka's hair slapped across her shoulders and her face screwed up in a hideous snarl. Her lips pulled away from her tiny square teeth and she hissed, first like a snake and then like a kettle, and the sound got louder and louder until Jessica put the apple back in her purse. Then Vezka's face returned to normal, as if the tension had been let loose of an elastic band. Valerie said, "That's what she did before." Jessica glared, but Valerie was already typing. The situation was dead to her. It was Jessica's problem now.
"Vezka doesn't want fruit,"
the little girl said.
"Vezka wants what Jessica has. The glow. Like when you were 8 and won the spelling bee. So bright then."
Jessica froze. She'd never mentioned that childhood memory to anyone at Creekview. It was a small private triumph from a school 3 states away. How did you... Something wet dribbled onto Jessica's hand. She pulled it back with a quick shriek. When her skin made contact with Vezka, a cold sensation shot up Jessica's arm like plunging into ice water. For a disorienting moment, she felt lighter, emptier, as though something had been siphoned from her. Vezka's eyes glazed over and drool pooled out of her slack jaw. Through the saliva, she murmured once more,
"Vezka, hungry."
Jessica's heart cried out for the little girl. Vezka was the manifestation of every reason Jessica had gone into special education. As they prepared to leave the office, Valerie called after them. "Miss Swan, I found these in her incomplete paperwork. Any idea what they are?" She held up a sheet with strange, angular symbols drawn in the margins, resembling nothing Jessica had ever seen in any language. Jessica stared at the symbols, feeling a strange tug of recognition. The lines seemed to shift and move as she looked at them, forming patterns that almost made sense before dissolving into nonsense again. For an instant, Jessica saw them glow with a dull red light, like embers in a dying fire. Jessica glanced back, but Vezka had already snatched the paper, crumpling it in her fists. The girl's vacant expression briefly transformed into something calculating, conscious, then vanished just as quickly. "Vezka!" Jessica cried out. "We treat things that belong to other people with respect." The paper crumpled in Vezka's fist, making a sound like dry bones snapping. When she opened her hand again, the sheet was gone, as if it had never existed. A thin trickle of what looked like black ink ran down her wrist. Impossibly, Vezka's drool seemed to thicken. Jessica took Vezka's other hand and felt that same cold pull, that same siphoning sensation. But this time, she also felt something else. A faint, warm pulse around her neck, as if she were wearing a pendant or locket that heated in Vezka's presence. She touched her throat reflexively, finding nothing there but bare skin. "Come on, Vezka," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's get you settled in."
Veska's academic difficulties were a result of her behavior, and she did not respond well to intervention. Jessica deployed as many of the positive behavior intervention strategies as she knew. Punch cards, a classroom economy, a clip chart, and others, but Vezka responded positively to none of it. In fact, as each strategy failed, her behavior seemed to grow more and more ruthless. When Jessica tracked her behavior on the punch cards, she ate them, regardless of whether she had a good day or not. She tore them, chewed the strips, and swallowed them. After that day, Jessica gave her play money to buy prizes. Vezka traded the play money to other students for their lunch money and bought candy from the vending machine. One after another, each intervention failed, and when she introduced the clip chart was the worst. It was a long foam core board cut very clean with 4 colors on it: green, yellow, blue, and red. Jessica pasted large emojis on each section: one angry, one silly, one happy, and one sad. Vezka could come into Jessica's room whenever she needed and use the large, strong clothespin with her name on it to clip and show how she felt. If she needed, she could take a break in the corner with the beanbag and the kinetic sand and the Legos and the toys. It only took an hour or so after Jessica introduced the clip chart to Vezka before the clothespin disappeared. She replaced it, and before the end of the day, that one was gone too. Over and over again, the big clothespins vanished from the emotion chart, and when Jessica finally stored it away, the pinching began. Vezka pinched earlobes on the playground and the soft part on the hand between the thumb and forefinger. Fat boys got their rolls clipped under the desk, and fat girls got it on their thighs. A teacher always knew a clipper because of the way they screamed. In the beginning, it was only the scream of abrupt and sharp pain, unexpected and intense, ingested by a mind too small and too inexperienced with the world to comprehend it. But before long, once the clippings were well known at Creekview, it was a scream of a dread realized, a worst fear manifested. It seemed impossible that the clothespins could hurt that much, but the next day, the clipped body part would be as ugly as rotten fruit, a purple square so dark that the edges were black, with a yellow center the color of an egg yolk. They could never prove it was Vezka. They never found clothespins except on a clipped kid. After each session with Vezka, Jessica noticed a peculiar fatigue creeping through her body. At first, she attributed it to the stress of managing such challenging behaviors, but this wasn't the normal exhaustion that came with teaching. This was deeper, as if something fundamental was being drained from her core. Her hands trembled slightly as she drove home. Twice, she had to pull over, overcome by sudden waves of dizziness. Exhaustion weighed her down like pockets full of stones. Jessica found herself falling asleep at her desk during lunch, waking disoriented with no memory of dozing off. The fatigue was bone deep and persistent, no matter how much sleep she got. Caffeine barely touched it. More trouble were the gaps in her memory. She'd find herself in the middle of a lesson with no recollection of how she'd started it, standing in the school parking lot with keys in hand, unable to remember walking out of the building. Sometimes she'd come across notes in her lesson planner,
written in her handwriting that she had no memory of writing. Strange symbols drawn in the margins that resembled those she'd seen on Vezka's paperwork. She's just different, Jessica told herself again and again. And I'm just tired. Vezka's just a little girl. The other teachers were unconvinced. They talked about it in the staff lounge. How, after all of it, the punch card eating, the money scams, the clipping, came Vezka's laugh. And that was enough proof for them. Vezka's laugh was at once innocent and wicked, as if those two things need not be separate. The melody of its song was chaotic, like dropping a handful of rubber balls onto a steel pan drum, and it was bright the way the moon is, dark except for light reflected. It chilled Jessica the first time she heard it, a fact that she desperately repressed. The laugh sent a shiver down the back of her ear to her clavicle, and then there came the aftershock that rippled down her spine. "You can't be serious," Chandra Brown said over her meatloaf in the teacher's lounge. "That child ain't right, and you all know it." She pointed her fork at Jessica. "I don't know what kind of voodoo she's working on you, Miss Swan, but that girl ain't a normal special needs case. There's something wrong with her." Melanie shook her head. "I think we should give her more time to adjust. Who knows what she's been through? Her records are incomplete. We don't even know where she came from." "I know exactly where she came from," Chandra muttered, too low for most to hear. "Same place they always come from." Jessica caught the comment and frowned. "What does that mean?" Chandra's dark eyes fixed on Jessica with unexpected intensity. "Ask Don sometime about the winter '97. Ask him about the transfer student back then. Then come talk to me." Before Jessica could respond, Valerie appeared at the lounge doorway. "Mrs. Swan, phone call. It's about Vezka." In the office, Jessica picked up the receiver. "Hello? This is Jessica Swan." Nothing but static answered her. A strange, rhythmic static that almost sounded like whispered words just below the threshold of understanding. Then, abruptly, a click and a dial tone. "They hung up," Jessica told Valerie, replacing the receiver. Valerie frowned. "That's odd. The woman specifically asked for you. Said she had information about Vezka's previous school. Did she leave a name?" "Wright, I think. Eleanor Wright." The name triggered something in Jessica, a flash of recognition, though she was certain she'd never met anyone by that name. For an instant, she felt the phantom weight of something hanging around her neck, warm against her skin. "I'll try calling back," Jessica said, though she suddenly felt reluctant to pursue it. That night, Jessica started a journal. She needed to document what was happening, both to Vezka and, increasingly, to herself. She sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold beside her, and wrote, "January 12th. Third intervention attempt failed. Vezka destroyed all behavior tracking systems. Strange physical symptoms after our sessions. Extreme fatigue, trembling hands, moments of confusion. Could be stress-related, but timing is suspicious. We'll monitor closely." Physical description. Vezka's laugh triggers physiological response unlike any child I've worked with. Skin temperature drops. Heart rate increases. Flight response activates. Questions. Why does no paperwork exist from previous school? Who drops her off in the mornings? Why do I never see parents? She paused, pen hovering over the page, then added, "Note to self. Check district database for similar cases in past. Ask Dawn how long Vezka-like behaviors have been documented at Creekview. As she wrote the words, a small silver object caught her eye, reflecting the kitchen light. On the far edge of the table sat a tarnished locket with a thin chain, the sort her grandmother might have worn. Jessica frowned. She didn't own such a thing and had no recollection of placing it there. When she reached for it, the locket seemed to shimmer and grow translucent, like a mirage in the desert. By the time her fingers touched the spot, nothing was there. Rubbing her eyes, Jessica decided that it was time for bed. Looking back at her journal on the table, she considered the Vezka challenge again. It all must be a cultural bias. Vezka's accent was very thick, after all, and it must affect her laugh, too, and the roots of America's animosity towards Eastern Europeans ran deeper than just the Cold War and election meddling. Surely, she assured herself, Jessica was merely exhuming long-buried and unexamined prejudices. But as she closed her journal and prepared for bed, the memory of Vezka's knowing comment about the spelling bee resurfaced. There was no way the child could have known about that moment from Jessica's childhood. No way at all.
The surname Nevelka yielded nothing. Jessica sat in her apartment on a Sunday night, shrouded in darkness. She'd started her research when it was light outside, and had become so engrossed that she didn't even notice the sun's light sinking beneath the horizon. She'd spent hours searching through Eastern European surname databases that had led her nowhere. Bulgarian genealogy archives brought nothing. Romanian family records brought nothing. Even broader Slavic surname compilations showed no trace of Nevelka. It was as if the name had been invented from nothing, pulled out of the ether like a magician's rabbit. Jessica rubbed her eyes, which felt like they'd been scrubbed with sand. The digital clock on her microwave read 2:17 a.m. Normal people would be asleep by now. Normal teachers wouldn't be obsessing over a student's last name in the hollow hours of the morning. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong about Vezka Nevelka. Something that went beyond behavioral issues or academic challenges. As Jessica leaned closer to the screen, a reflection caught her eye in the dark glass of her window. For a moment, she thought she saw a small figure standing behind her, a child-sized silhouette with stringy hair. She whirled around, nearly knocking over her chair, but the apartment was empty. Of course it was. She was safe. She had to keep telling herself that. She was safe. Jessica closed her laptop. That was enough work for one night. If she figured out any leads, she could return to the hunt. In the meantime, she returned to her journal, the one she'd started tracking Vezka's behavior in, and began a new entry. January 15th. Energy levels declining rapidly after Vezka contact. Intense fatigue, muscle weakness, occasional confusion. Searched Nevelka's surname. No records exist. Received a strange call from Eleanor. Parent? Former teacher? Need to check Creekview archives. As she finished her entry, Jessica noticed something strange on the paper she'd just filled. In the upper corner, barely visible, was a small symbol. One of the angular marks she'd seen on Vezka's paperwork. She hadn't drawn it consciously, had no memory of her pen making those lines, yet here it was, as if it had risen to the surface from the page itself. Idly, she picked up her phone. She hadn't looked at it in hours. Jessica hoped that cute puppies or hypnotizing pottery videos would distract her. She noticed a text from Melanie from a few hours ago.
You okay? It read. Notice you looking really pale today. Let me know if you need anything. Jessica's thumb hovered over the keyboard. How could she possibly explain what was happening? That a student was somehow draining her life force? And she was researching supernatural entities at 2 a.m.? Melanie would think she'd lost her mind. Just tired. Challenging student. Thanks for checking in. Jessica sent the text, figuring that Melanie was already asleep and would see it in the morning. She bit her lip, hesitating, and then added a second text. Actually, do you know if the school keeps records of past teachers? Thinking of a research project. Melanie's response came quickly. Jessica wondered if she was awake doing grades. Library has yearbooks dating back to 1952. Old files in basement storage. Need a key from Dawn. What kind of project? Jessica stared at the message. The basement. Of course there would be records in a dark, isolated basement. She typed carefully. Interested in patterns of student behavior over time. Looking into the Eleanor Wright woman who called me today. A third message from Melanie arrived. Check the trophy case by the gym. There's a memorial plaque that might interest you. In memory of Eleanor Wright, who gave everything for her students. Never noticed it before today. Weird coincidence? Jessica felt a chill run through her body. Eleanor Wright. The name was appearing too frequently to be a coincidence. As she set down her phone, Jessica noticed something disturbing. Her hands were shaking, not the slight tremor of exhaustion, but violent trembling, as if she were freezing. Yet the apartment was warm. She hadn't been near Vezka for hours. And yet, somehow, she felt the girl's presence, as if Vezka were in the room with her, watching her research, watching her uncover secrets. The hair on Jessica's arm stood on end. She whirled around, scanning the darkened corners of her apartment. Nothing there. Of course, nothing was there. She was just tired, paranoid from lack of sleep. But as Jessica finally crawled into bed at 3 a.m., she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with the sound of rubber balls bouncing on a steel pan drum and laughter that glowed like moonlight. The first scream came from the playground. It was a Tuesday, 3 days after Jessica had stored away the emotion chart. The scream wasn't like the others, not the high-pitched squeal of delight or the indignant wail of perceived injustice that normally punctuated recess. This was pure, distilled agony, as if someone had compressed pain into its essential form and released it through a child's vocal cords. Jessica was at the door before she'd even registered moving. Outside, a circle of children had formed around a small boy, Gabriel from Mrs. Peterson's class, who clutched his earlobe, tears streaming down his face. When he pulled his hand away, Jessica saw it, a large yellow clothespin, identical to the one she'd purchased for Vezka's emotion chart, clamped firmly on the soft flesh of his ear. Who did this? She demanded, gently removing the cruel implement. Gabriel's earlobe was already swelling, angry red marks deepening where the plastic teeth had dug in. The children glanced at each other, then at the ground. No one spoke. I won't be mad. I just need to know. From the corner of her eye, she caught a flash of stringy blonde hair disappearing around the corner of the school building. That familiar, chaotic laugh drifted back, followed by the sound of small feet running away. Jessica knelt beside Gabriel, using a tissue from her pocket to dab at the small drop of blood on his ear. "Are you okay?" He nodded, though his lower lip still trembled. "She said what you wanted to know what color I'd turn." "Who said that, Gabriel?" The boy's eyes darted nervously to the other children, then back to Jessica. "Vezka. But she told me if I told, she'd find me where I was sleeping." A chill ran through Jessica. "I won't let that happen," she promised, though she wasn't entirely sure how she could prevent it. By the end of the week, 3 more children had been clipped. That's what the students called it now, the voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. "Did you hear? Emily got clipped during silent reading." Horrified fascination spread through the school like a virus. 2 days later, the first bruises emerged. Perfect rectangular wounds, purple-black around the edges with sickly yellow centers. Jessica found Asher sitting alone at lunch, methodically dissecting his sandwich into increasingly smaller pieces. Unlike the other children, he seemed unafraid of Vezka, meeting her vacant stare whenever their paths crossed. It was as if he recognized something in her that the others didn't, or couldn't. "Can I sit?" Jessica asked, gesturing to the empty space beside him. He nodded, still focused on his sandwich deconstruction. "Aren't you going to eat that?" she asked. "Not hungry." Then, without looking up, he said, "She's not a girl, you know." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Asher's dark eyes met hers, suddenly intense. "Vezka, she's not a girl. She's like a coat that something else is wearing." "A coat," Jessica repeated, the words sending an inexplicable chill through her. "I saw her face change once," he continued, his voice matter of fact. "When she thought no one was looking. I went away and there was just this mouth." He shuddered slightly. "She knows I saw. That's why she hasn't clipped me yet. She's waiting for something worse." Before Jessica could respond, a commotion erupted across the cafeteria. A 3rd grader was screaming, clutching his hand where a clothespin had been attached to the web of skin between his thumb and forefinger. "It's her, you know." Chandra Brown's voice startled Jessica as she documented the latest incident in her growing notebook of Vezka-related observations. "That weird little transfer student of yours." Jessica bristled. "You have no proof of that." "Proof?" Chandra snorted. "The clip started showing up the day after you put the chart in your room. Nobody had clothespins before that. And every time a kid gets clipped, that girl is somewhere nearby. You can hear her laugh." "That's circumstantial," Jessica replied, but the defense felt hollow in her mouth. She'd begun to suspect the same thing, though admitting it felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about her profession. Every child could be reached. Every child deserved an advocate. But after each clipping, Jessica found herself more drained than before. It wasn't just emotional exhaustion. It was physical, as if something essential was being pulled from her marrow. Last night, she'd found a gray hair at her temple, gleaming silver against the red. She was 35. Too young for gray. Too young to feel this old. In her private journal, which she'd taken to hiding between her mattress and box spring, Jessica had begun documenting her symptoms alongside Vezka's incidents. January 18th, 4th clipping incident. Gabriel's earlobe, severe bruising, reported extreme pain. Vezka seen nearby, laughing. physical symptoms intensifying, extreme fatigue after confronting Vezka about incidents which she denied, dizzy spell in bathroom afterward, 3 minutes of lost time. Found myself staring at the mirror with no memory of how long I'd been there. Reflection looked wrong somehow, older. Dreams increasingly disturbed. Vezka appears in them, always watching, always hungry. Found another Eleanor Wright reference, memorial plaque in the trophy case. Gave everything for her students. Need to learn more about her. That night, Jessica stayed late, long after the other teachers had gone home. She combed through Vezka's sparse records once more, searching for anything she might have missed. Finding nothing, she packed up to leave, her body aching with weariness that transcended physical exhaustion. As she reached for the light switch, a reflection in the window caught her eye. A small figure stood in the doorway behind her. Jessica whirled around. "Vezka? What are you doing here so late? Where are your parents?" The girl tilted her head at an uncomfortable angle, her eyes vacant as always. But, for just a moment, so brief Jessica might have imagined it, something else looked out through those eyes. Something ancient, something aware.
Jessica has pretty light,
Vezka said softly.
Vezka sees it glowing, brighter than the others.
What do you mean, Vezka? Jessica took a step toward her and felt that now familiar wave of weakness wash over her. What others? Vezka's vacant expression returned, drool pooling at the corner of her mouth. She held out her small, pale hand. In it lay a clothespin, the plastic edges stained with something dark.
Vezka wants to play a game, she said. Vezka wants to see how much Jessica can take before the light goes out.
The girl's face split into a terrible smile, and her laugh, that horrible, chaotic laugh, filled the classroom, bouncing off the walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jessica reached out to grab her, but Vezka was already gone, skipping down the darkened hallway, leaving nothing behind but the sound of her laughter and that single clothespin on the floor. Jessica stared at the innocent-looking piece of plastic. Something dark crusted at its edges, blood from some child's pinched skin. She should throw it away. She should report these incidents formally. She should tell Dawn everything. Instead, she picked up the clothespin with trembling fingers and added it to her growing collection of evidence. Something was happening at Creekview Elementary, and somehow Vezka Nevelka was at the center of it. And Jessica was beginning to suspect that she herself was the ultimate target. She came out of a daze at her desk. It had been a dream. God, she thought to herself, rubbing her face with both hands. What's a girl got to do to get some sleep? The school was empty as she finally left the building. The dark parking lot retained but a single occupant, her car. Jessica felt the weight of unseen eyes following her. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock her door. Just as she was about to slide into the driver's seat, she noticed something on the dashboard. A small silver locket on a thin chain gleaming in the moonlight. The same locket she'd imagined seeing on her kitchen table. After the night she'd been having, Jessica assumed it had been a dream, yet here it was, in her car. She considered pinching herself to see if she was dreaming again, but thought better of it. With trembling fingers, Jessica picked it up. The moment the metal touched her skin, a jolt of recognition shot through her, though she was certain she'd never owned such a thing. When she pressed the small clasp, the locket popped open to reveal nothing but a scrap of yellowed paper with a single word written in faded ink. Remember. The rows of desks in Chandra's room made Jessica nervous. They reminded her of the Panopticon. Even Chandra's presence was aggressive. Her voice was rough and loud and sharp. She spoke like a Rottweiler. Jessica didn't think she should be teaching at all, much less teaching the tender minds of elementary school. But Chandra's students all ran up to give her a hug in the morning and had spoken quiet, bittersweet goodbyes before winter break. Jessica chalked it all up to Stockholm Syndrome. But lately, Jessica had begun to look at Chandra differently. Behind the woman's gruff exterior lurked a fierce protectiveness toward her students. And when Chandra spoke about Vezka, there was something in her eyes, a knowing fear that Jessica had begun to recognize in her own reflection. When the accusations against Vezka came out, the misunderstandings, Chandra was too hard on the little one. She confronted Vezka in the hallway while the rest of class was lined up after library. Jessica caught her reprimanding Vezka in front of the whole class and was so mortified that for a while she couldn't speak. "Girl," Chandra barked, leaning forward in the waist, hands on hips and brow creased in unabashed anger. "What are you trying to do to my children?" She glared at Vezka and gave no indication that Jessica was there. "These is perfectly good children, trying to learn, and you over here pinching them." "You have no proof of that," Jessica snarled, stepping between them. Even as the words left her mouth, a small voice inside her whispered that she was lying to Chandra, to herself. The bruises on the children were real. The clothespins were real. Vezka's laugh after each incident was real. The silver locket that had appeared on her windshield now hung beneath Jessica's blouse. It was warm now, as it always was whenever she was near Vezka. Jessica was certain that it was her imagination, and part of her wanted to throw the locket away. It was, after all, an unsettling object that had appeared without explanation. Yet, she couldn't bear to be parted from it, as if it were an old heirloom she'd always owned. Chandra turned on Jessica. The motion was precise and smooth like that of a new machine. "And you need to keep them clothespins locked up." Jessica glowered. She expected to stay like that, to engage Chandra in a silent battle of wills, but already Chandra had returned her gaze to Vezka, as if Jessica had no place in the conversation. Then, surprising Jessica, Chandra's voice softened slightly as she knelt to Vezka's level. "Look at me, child," she said. The command was firm, but not unkind. "I don't know what's been going on with you, but I've been teaching too long not to recognize trouble when I see it. 28 years in this building, and I've only seen this once before." Jessica's ears perked up. "What do you mean, once before?" Chandra ignored her, keeping her eyes fixed on Vezka. "Back in 97, we had a child just like you. Same vacant look, same cruel streak, and a sweet young teacher just like Miss Swan who thought she could save him." She glanced up at Jessica, and for a brief moment, Jessica saw something like genuine concern in her eyes. That teacher never came back after what happened. Changed schools, changed towns. Some said changed her whole life. A current of recognition ran through Jessica, though she couldn't place why. 1997. That would have been 30 years after 1967, the date she'd seen on Eleanor Wright's memorial plaque. The incident felt significant, though she couldn't say why. Vezka's expression remained blank, but her head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. "You need to leave my kids alone, girl," Chandra continued, her voice regaining its edge. "I don't care what program you in, special or not. Hurting little boys and girls ain't right no matter what planet you from." The bell rang, and Vezka snickered. She marched into class with the rest of her peers. Chandra spoke to Jessica now, turning her head in that same smooth swivel. "Where the heck are her parents, Miss Swan? What have they said? You need to get a hold of them and quick, Miss Swan. As far as I'm concerned, that is your student." Jessica bristled, ready with a sharp retort, but Chandra wasn't finished. "I know you think I'm being harsh," she said, her voice lowering, "but these children are my care. I'm responsible for keeping them safe." She glanced down at the hall where Vezka disappeared. "And I don't think any of us are safe with that one around. There's something not right about her. Something hungry." The words sent a chill down Jessica's spine. It was the same word she'd written in her journal the night before, the same sensation she'd felt in Vezka's presence. "I'll handle it," Jessica said, trying to project confidence she no longer felt. "She just needs the right approach." Chandra's eyes softened with something Jessica had never seen before. Pity. "You remind me of Eleanor Wright," she said quietly. "Same fire, same belief you can fix everything. She thought that too before the incident." "Eleanor Wright?" Jessica repeated, the name striking a chord. The mysterious phone caller, the memorial plaque. It couldn't be a coincidence. "She was here before you and me," Chandra continued, her voice taking on a different cadence, almost reverent. "Best teacher this school ever had. They say children loved her, administration respected her, but she got one of them special cases back in 67. Chandra's eyes grew distant. "My mama was a student here then. Said Miss Wright changed overnight. Went from young and vibrant to old and empty in just months. Her hair turned white, face lined like an old apple. Then one day, the child was gone and Eleanor was different. Hollow, my mama said, like something had eaten her from the inside out." Jessica's heart hammered in her chest. "What happened to her?" "Stayed on teaching, but the spark was gone. Retired in the 80s, died in February 97. Chandra's eyes locked with Jessica's. The same month, the new transfer student arrived. The one just like Vezka. With one last glower, Chandra cocked her head up, spun around on her foot, and marched off to join her students in class. Jessica stood alone in the hallway, the sound of Vezka's snicker echoing in her mind. For the first time since the transfer student had arrived, Jessica allowed herself to consider a terrible possibility. What if some children truly couldn't be reached? She pushed the thought away. That was ridiculous. Vezka was just a troubled child who needed help. Chandra was seeing monsters where there were none. Jessica was a professional. She was trained for this. But as she walked back to her classroom, the memory of Vezka's laugh followed her. Bright the way the moon is, dark except for light reflected. The calming corner was empty save for the two of them. Jessica had asked Vezka to stay behind while the other children went to lunch. The girl sat cross-legged on the blue beanbag, staring at nothing in particular, her stringy blonde hair hanging like tattered curtains around her face. Her hands moved in her lap, restless little spiders testing the environment. Jessica fingered the silver locket through her blouse, drawing an inexplicable comfort from its presence. Since finding it on her dashboard, her symptoms had improved slightly. The fatigue remained, but the dizzy spells had decreased, and she hadn't experienced any more episodes of lost time. She hadn't told anyone about the locket. It felt too personal, too connected to whatever was happening to her. "I thought we could try something different today," Jessica said, settling onto the floor beside her. The exhaustion that had become her constant companion pressed against her eyelids, but she pushed through it. No punch cards, no clip charts, just talking. Vezka's vacant eyes slid toward her, then away like marbles rolling across uneven ground.
Vezka doesn't like talking,
she said. Her voice had that flat, metallic quality that always made Jessica think of a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. "That's okay," Jessica replied. "We don't have to talk. We can just sit together." The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant sounds of children in the cafeteria and the soft whir of the heating systems. Jessica watched Vezka's face, searching for some flicker of the child she believed must exist beneath the strange behaviors and vacant stares. There had to be a little girl in there. There had to be. Without fully meaning to, Jessica began to hum. It was an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing, something about moonlight and sleeping gardens. The melody was simple, rising and falling like gentle waves. From inside her blouse, the locket grew suddenly warm, almost hot against her skin. At the same moment, Vezka's head snapped up. The motion was so sudden that Jessica nearly stopped humming, but something in the girl's face made her continue. For the first time since Vezka had arrived in Creekview, her eyes seemed to focus. Really focus. Not just slide over things without seeing them.
"My mother sang that,"
Vezka whispered. The voice was different, higher, and genuinely childlike. Jessica kept humming, afraid that if she spoke, the moment would shatter.
"She sang it before bed,"
Vezka continued, a tear slipping down her cheek like a lost traveler.
"Before the dark came, before it took me."
Jessica's heart pounded against her ribs. She stopped humming and asked softly, "What took you, Vezka? What is it?" For one breathtaking moment, Vezka's eyes cleared completely. The vacancy vanished, replaced by an awareness so intense it was almost painful to witness. The little girl leaned forward and gripped Jessica's wrist with surprising strength.
"It's so hungry," she whispered urgently. "It fills the empty places with the pieces of others. Teachers are best. They have the most to take. It wears me like a coat, but sometimes I can still see out."
Her fingers tightened, digging into Jessica's flesh.
"It wore others before me. It will wear you next if..."
Vezka's body went rigid, Her back arched, her head tilted at an impossible angle, and her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Jessica reached for her, but before she could touch the girl, Vezka's head snapped forward again. The vacancy was back. Worse than before. It was as if someone had wiped a slate clean, leaving nothing behind. Vezka threw back her head and laughed. That horrible, chaotic sound like rubber balls on a steel pan drum. "Silly Jessica," she said, her voice once again flat and metallic. "So bright, so sweet, so feeling." The pressure of Vezka's fingers on Jessica's wrists intensified, and with it came a sensation like nothing she had ever experienced before. It was as if someone had inserted a straw into her veins and was drawing out not just her blood, but her very essence. The room dimmed around her. Sounds became muffled and distant. A cold weight settled on her chest, spreading outward to her limbs. The locket against her skin flared with sudden heat, searing against her flesh. Jessica gasped, the pain shocking her out of her fog. Vezka hissed and released her grip, staring at Jessica's chest where the locket lay hidden. "Is that?" she demanded, her voice a disturbing blend of child and something ancient. "Where did you get it?" Jessica clutched the locket through her blouse. "I don't know what you're talking about." Vezka's mouth stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile. "Silver. She gave you silver. It won't save you, you know. It only delays the inevitable." "Who gave it to me?" Jessica pressed. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Vezka rose from the beanbag with fluid, unchildlike grace and skipped toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back, her face split into a grin too wide for her small features.
"You taste like hope," she said. "Most delicious thing there is."
Then she was gone, the sound of her skipping footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Jessica alone in the calming corner that suddenly felt anything but calm. It took Jessica nearly 10 minutes to find the strength to stand. When she finally made it to the faculty bathroom, the face that stared back at her from the mirror was gaunt, the skin under the eyes bruised with exhaustion. The silver streak at her temple had widened, now clearly visible against her auburn hair. Another face appeared in the mirror behind her. Asher, standing in the open doorway of the faculty bathroom, his dark eyes solemn.
"Asher,"
Jessica gasped, whirling around.
"you shouldn't be in here."
"I saw her," he said simply. "I saw what she did to you."
"Saw who? What are you talking about?"
"Vezka, in the calming corner." His gaze was unnervingly steady. "She was taking from you, and I could see it, like smoke coming out of your mouth when she held your arm." Jessica stared at him, speechless. Asher shouldn't have been anywhere near the calming corner during lunch. He should have been in the cafeteria with the other children. "You need protection," he continued matter-of-factly. "The silver helps, but it's not enough."
"How do you know about the silver?"
Jessica whispered. Asher's expression was ancient, knowing in a way no 8-year-olds should be. "I've seen this before," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "I remember." Before Jessica could question him further, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall as silently as he'd appeared. That night, Jessica added to her growing journal of observations.
January 20th. Breakthrough with Vezka during lunch. Responded to Grandma's lullaby. Brief moment of clarity. Spoken first person. Mentioned something taking her, wearing her like a coat. Said it was hungry and fills empty places with pieces of others. Claimed teachers are best and have the most to take. Physical symptoms worse than ever after contact. Near fainting spell. Extreme weakness lasted hours. Silver locket seemed to offer some protection. Vezka reacted negatively to it. Silver streak in hair now prominent and undeniable. Asher saw something during our interaction. Described it as smoke being drawn from me. Claims to have seen this before and to remember. What does he remember? How is he connected to this? Research questions. What entity feeds on hope or passion? What did Vezka mean by it had warned others before? Need to find Eleanor Wright's records. Need to understand what happened in 1967 and again in 1997. Need answers before it's too late.
As she wrote the final line, Jessica noticed a strange tingling in her right palm. Looking down, she saw the skin ripple, as if something beneath the surface was trying to push its way out. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought she saw the outline of what looked like a wooden splinter beneath her skin, though she had no memory of ever getting such an injury. Then the rippling stopped, and her palm appeared normal again. Jessica stared at her hand for a long time, wondering if the fatigue was causing her to hallucinate. But deep down, she knew it wasn't her imagination. Something was happening to her, something connected to Vezka, to Eleanor Wright, and perhaps even to Asher. The question was whether she could solve the mystery before whatever was wearing Vezka decided it was time to wear her instead. The number listed on Vezka's contact form always seemed to be busy. Jessica couldn't get through to voicemail, and when asked about it, Valerie simply took a bite of celery.
That's the number they gave me,
she said through the munching.
The parents?
Valerie shook her head and took another bite.
No, the district. I haven't met the parents.
They didn't register her?
Of course they did,
she snapped, and then paused. Her pupils went back, and her gaze went somewhere in the past. Jessica pressed.
Did you meet them? Mom or Dad?
Valerie's brow furrowed, and her green eyes dug around Jessica's face.
I don't remember, but one of them had to have come in. I'm just trying to get a hold of parents.
Valerie looked at her sidelong and pursed her lips.
Have you tried calling at a different time?
Jessica frowned.
Of course I have.
Valerie bobbed her head. She shrugged, finished her celery, and went back to her computer. Jessica almost scowled, but closed her eyes and stopped herself. This place brought out the worst in her. She hadn't scowled at another woman her whole life. Her face flushed and she dropped her gaze. A stone fell into her stomach. Much quieter than before, she asked,
What about an address?
Valerie raised her chin and cocked an eyebrow. Her eyes gleamed the way an old, dirty cardinal's might while inspecting a penitent whore. The keys on her keyboard clacked. She announced,
128 6th Avenue. That's it? That's what they have on file. The parents?
The district. After school that day, Jessica called the house one more time from the landline in the classroom and got another busy signal. She looked at the address written on the sticky note she'd brought from Valerie and then looked at her cell phone to see what she'd already expected. No notifications, no calls, no texts. No excuse not to go. And Vezka really needed the support. She grabbed her keys, shrugged on her coat, and hurried out the door before she had the chance to think. On the way out, Don saw her from his office and waved at her.
"You're on your way out at a decent time," he called, smiling.
Jessica stopped at the exit. "Yeah," she said with a breathy, nervous exhale.
"That's great. I'm glad."
Don waved again, and Jessica waved back. They said goodbye. Her GPS took her along the strangest route, driving down the long street away from the school and then snaking away from the main road, back around in the direction of the school but wide away from it. Jessica was ready to give up when she realized she was in the woods beside town and completely lost. The road was narrow and crowded with white, skinny birch trees. Their black eyes watched her as the light faded around her. The cell phone lost GPS and Jessica frowned. She stopped driving and peered down the road. It was too narrow to turn around. She'd have to drive backwards almost the entire way back. She couldn't get any more lost. There's only one road, after all. Jessica looked at the road behind and took a breath. Then she looked ahead. She swallowed and kept going. The road ended a few miles later in a half clearing of trees that was swallowed up by the less dense woods that, if she wanted to, Jessica could see through. The house surprised her at first because it was so out of place. It seemed so ordinary to be in the middle of a white birch forest. One story, white walls, a porch. Before she got out of the car, she checked the address scribbled on the sticky note, comparing it with the decaying vinyl stuck on the small metal mailbox. 128 16th Avenue. The district must have made a mistake. Most of the shingles were missing and the white paint peeled off like picked-at scabs. The stairs leading up to the porch were so splintered and warped that they looked like they'd been split in half, and two of the colonial-style columns had given way, causing half the covering to collapse. There was no glass in the windows save for some jagged teeth encircling the maw of a few. From what she saw, the inside of the house was completely dark, as if light had never touched it. Vezka couldn't live here. No one could. As far as Jessica could tell, no one even knew this place existed. There wasn't even any graffiti on the walls, just the decay of time. It was getting dark, but she'd come this far. She may as well finish what she had started. Jessica stepped around and through the overgrown weeds, glad that she didn't wear a dress and flats like Chandra, even more so when she had to leap over the rotten steps onto the porch. The planks made a loud, unsettling squeal, and Jessica had to reach out and grip the banister to keep from falling. The blare of pain ran from her palm and into her wrist before settling into a steady, shrill shriek. Jessica bit her lip to keep from swearing and saw the enormous splinter. It was in deep, and she was bleeding. Her eyes stung, but she swallowed the tears, took a deep breath, and was grateful for once that she was left-handed. Jessica was suddenly aware that all the sound in the woods had stopped. It was the loudest sound in the world because only a few moments ago she had been immersed in evening bird song and the clatter of trees reaching out to one another with naked branches in the wind. But now there was nothing, and the nothingness had been abrupt. It was cold, too, colder than at the school, and Jessica hoped that Vezka had heating inside. She knocked on the door, surprised at how solid it was. There was no answer.
"Hello?"
she called.
"Mrs. and Mr. Nevelka? This is Miss Swan, Vezka's resource room teacher."
After a few moments, she knocked again, if for no other reason than to break the silence, and the door fell backwards, falling off of its hinges and slamming onto the floor with a crash and an explosion of dust. Jessica screamed and jumped back. Her foot caught a weak point in the porch and broke the board. She caught herself at the banister again, this time with her forearm, and pulled herself up before she fell through the porch. When her leg was out of the hole, she thought she saw something scurry away. Jessica took a moment to catch her breath, leaning against the wall of the house. Her hand hurt. It was bleeding badly. She had a scarf and hand sanitizer in her car, which seemed so far away now that it was on the other side of the porch and down the driveway. Her hand would have to wait. She would check on Vezka first. There was dirt and dust everywhere, caked so thick that the whole house looked like an old photograph. Immediately off of the entry hallway sat the front room, and vines crept through the broken windows and snaked over the sills and spread across the walls. A diseased sapling grew out of a hole in the floorboards. Its little arms were scabbed with gummy orange sap that looked like pus, and its leaves were blistered with lumpy cankers. It appeared weak, like it was waging a war for its life. Around the sapling were all the standard trappings of a home. A pair of matching couches, each with side tables, a rug and a lamp, a coffee table. Jessica called out for Vezka, but no response came. The house swallowed the girl's name, the sound landing flat on the gluttonous walls, which allowed no resonance whatsoever. It was still quiet, and Jessica decided that a storm must be coming. She would need to be quick, both to keep out of the snowstorm and to fix her hand. Blood streamed down her palm and fingers, and the wound throbbed with a slow, ponderous beat. The rest of the house was much like the front room, dirty and abandoned, as if someone had left in a panic and taken only the clothes they wore and whatever else they could carry. There were only a few things disturbed: the shattered mirror in the entry hallway, the hutch in the dining room with the broken glass, the stinking armchair in the front room with the dirty stuffing erupting out of a hole in the back where mice had made a nest. The mice were dead now, or at least 3 of them were. Their shriveled little bodies curled into themselves, blackened with rot, their hands pressed together as if, in their dying moments, they had sent a prayer. Jessica called out for Vezka once more. Once more, no answer came. She turned to leave, deciding that the address was a hoax and that the Nevelka family was in transition, couch surfing somewhere else and deeply ashamed. Jessica would have to find another solution to the misunderstandings around their daughter. Before she could take a step, ringing filled Jessica's head. It was a high-pitched whine that filled her cranium, starting in the very deepest part of her brain and extending outward unilaterally like the expanding shockwave of a bomb blast, bringing with it a blossoming pain that she had never thought possible. When the sound hit her skull, it felt like the bone vibrated. Jessica brought her hands to her head, running her fingers through her hair and squeezing her scalp as if she could push the noise and the agony out of her skull, but it didn't seem like it had stopped inside of her. It seemed to expand beyond her own meat and bone, growing louder and louder as the pain steepened with it. The edges of her vision went black. She opened her mouth but couldn't groan, couldn't whimper, couldn't scream. Jessica's knees gave out beneath her and she extended her hands to break her fall. Her entire arm was a lightning bolt, and for a flash, Jessica thought the force had fired the splinter all the way up her arm. All of her strength drained out of her as if she were a cup knocked over. She battled against the fatigue pulling her onto the floor, but she could hardly keep her eyes open or her head up. The ringing filled her whole body. Everything beneath her skin was noise. Tightening from the edges, the dark ring of her vision crept closer and closer to the center, and what she could see was blurred. Down the hall, framed by the dying light of a broken window, there was a figure. Jessica didn't think it wore any clothes, and its limbs were so exaggerated that the elbows and knees, all of the joints were lanky and bug-like. Jessica's vision went black, but even over the ringing, which was total, she heard laughter. Chaotic, like dropping a handful of rubber balls onto a steel pan drum, and bright the way the moon is, dark except for light reflected. Then there was nothing. The classroom was quiet, and the world outside the windows was so black that in them she could see herself reflected. Her hair was a mess. Random strings came out of the bun in long, limp spurts. Jessica rubbed her eyes and took a deep breath. She looked for the clock to check the time, but froze. Behind her, small, faint, distant, someone laughed. It had the tin can timbre of a child's homemade string phone, but it was unmistakable. Jessica whirled around and almost fell out of her chair. After her dream of the house, she was at her wit's end. Like a trapped starling, her heart flapped and panicked, screaming escape. Of course, there was nothing behind her. There was only the whiteboard and the big class calendar. She'd forgotten to change the day. It still said it was Friday. She'd have to change it. Jessica heaved another huge sigh and kneaded her forehead, debating whether she should finish working or go home. It felt so late. Down the hallway, someone laughed again. This time she did fall out of the chair, and it fell over with her. Her legs shook so much that she almost couldn't feel them, and her arms barely supported her as she stared out of the open classroom door. The laugh was far away, but she knew it, and it shouldn't be here. She heard the laugh again, shorter now, like a bright chuckle, and this time it was close, just on the other side of the desk. Jessica cried out and covered her mouth, pushing herself away as fast as she could with her rubber legs. She could see past the desk now, and there was nothing there, but she kept crawling until she hit something. A ringing sound filled her head, and Jessica looked up. Above her, stringy blonde hair hung around a face like shadows. With a jolt so sudden that it felt like a physical blow, Jessica was back in her bed, staring at the ceiling and soaked in sweat. She vomited before she could scream, and then she was so exhausted that it didn't matter anymore. She lay there in the warm puke, weeping and shaking. At last, after the sour bile went cold and she no longer noticed the smell, Jessica had enough of herself to pull her face and hair out of the sticky muck so she could reach out for her phone, but it fumbled out of her hands and she couldn't check the time. She curled into herself like a snail, making a mantra, "It's Thursday. None of it happened. It's a dream. It's a dream. It's a dream." Jessica wept until her alarm went off. The bell rang, and Jessica rubbed her face. It must be after recess. The day melted into a blur like oatmeal, a homogeneous slurring of time. She needed sleep. The weight of the sleepless night before clung to her eyelids, pressed against the back of her eyes, and made her feel sick. Something came out of the vent. Jessica whirled around and looked up at the slatted mouth. She swore something had come out of the vent. She slapped her face a few times and took a deep breath, shuddering. Then it came again. It wasn't a thing. It was a sound. But she was so tired. Could they be the same thing? The sound leaked out of the vent, seeping into the air and tainting it. It filled the room and she breathed it in, something like a whisper, but not like anything spoken by vibrating air. The sound existed outside of waveforms, traveling however it liked, as if it could slip in and out of space. The bell rang, and Jessica woke up. She took a deep breath and went to the bathroom to splash water on her face. The eyes peering back at her from the mirror looked so old. She'd never seen herself so old before. The bags were heavy and her skin was sickly. Jessica sighed and splashed another few handfuls of water onto her face. It felt like floating, like the bathroom was melting, or maybe the darkness behind her eyes was spreading, and she felt herself sway side to side, the gentle movement of reeds in the breeze. Seductive sleep tugged at her shirt, and, reluctantly, she opened her eyes. One last time, she splashed her face with cold water. She patted it dry, looked at the face in the mirror, and heaved a sigh. She should go back. Her class was already there, and Jessica regretted not coming back faster. Garrett and Mandy, from her 5th grader group, were going at it, tearing paper into strips, wadding the strips up, and throwing them at each other with a cacophony of mindless giggles. They didn't know why they laughed. They didn't know why they threw the paper at each other. They didn't understand the biology, the impulses, the disabilities that made them do any of the things that they did. At least Zach wasn't part of their game. He sat at the far end, his head on his arms, his back rising and falling with the slow, irregular expansion and deflation of his own sleep. Zach was practically nocturnal. His desperate parents had found meth to be an appropriate escape from their hardship and thought that a laissez-faire approach to parenting was most effective. Zach played video games all night and slept at school whenever he could get away with it. Jessica wasn't one to judge. She calmed Mandy and Garrett down and got through the social skills lesson. Garrett and Mandy were fascinated by her explanation of the brain. She made a brain model by putting her fists together and called the prefrontal cortex the wise leader. The hippocampus was her fingers, the scribe, and the amygdala was the superhero, represented by her thumbs. She talked about how it all worked together to protect them, how it helped them make decisions, run from danger, and recognize danger. At one point, she even had Zach's attention. Jessica loved the little glimmer in their eyes. She lived for that glimmer, and that alone. It was more important than anything else in the world. In another time, these children would slip through the cracks of the school system and be discarded by society like rotten fruit. Jessica knew that she had a gift to reach them, to bring them home into the bosom of the world and make them reach their full potential. She saw the glimmer in their eyes, and it made her glimmer, too. Just when she was about to explain how that related to the social lesson, Chandra Brown stuck her head through the doorway. She snarled, "Miss Swan, you need to come take care of your girl." Jessica took a sharp inhale. Chandra hadn't even pardoned herself for interrupting.
"May I help you, Miss Brown?"
"Yeah, Miss Swan, you can." Mrs. Brown pointed through the open threshold. "You can come get your girl," she repeated. Jessica looked at her 5th graders and then at Mrs. Brown, mouth agape. A vein rose across the woman's forehead like a fat, ugly earthworm. "You waiting for a better invitation, Miss Swan?"
I can't just leave my students. I'm sure you can handle any behavior Vezka might be exhibiting. You're a very capable... She ain't welcome in my classroom no more, Miss Swan. Come get her. I already called Mr. Nolan.
At the sound of the principal's name, a tense hush shuddered over the fifth graders. Whatever was happening with the second grader and the two teachers was serious. Jessica bristled.
You can't just banish a student.
Mrs. Brown shrugged.
I just did. The police on their way, too.
She turned on her heels, her dress twirling along with her, and marched out of the room. Jessica's jaw dropped, and her eyes burst wide. She told Garrett, Mandy, and Zach to go back to the general education teachers. They packed their things while she rushed after Mrs. Brown.
What are you talking about? Why would you ever call the police on a child?
Mrs. Brown said nothing. Her face was stern like iron, set as if it had been melted and cast from cold hatred. Her neglect dragged the panicked, frantic Jessica down the hall as she repeated the desperate question over and over again. More than a few teachers peered at them through the narrow window in the door, and Mrs. Crone even came out into the hall to watch. At last, the last measure of calm in her spirit left her, evaporated with the heat of fear. Jessica roared, "Mrs. Brown, I demand an explanation." Her quarry cast an unimpressed look over her shoulder and opened the door to her classroom. To call it decimated was a kindness. Every cabinet was open and gutted, papers vomited across the floor, the pieces of games, cards, tokens, play money, torn from their boxes, littered the room like shrapnel. Broken pencils, bloody markers, desks in catastrophic disarray. And the children. Jessica had been so focused on Mrs. Brown that she hadn't noticed their sounds, hadn't heard the high-pitched wails that dipped low into frantic sobs. The children gulped for air like the room was filled with viscous fear too thick for them to swim out of. They gulped for air as if they were drowned in it. Vezka sat on Mrs. Brown's desk, swinging her legs forward and back. At her feet, Asher clutched his right hand close to his chest. His arm and shirt were red. A long pair of sewing scissors protruded out of his palm. The little boy wept. He wept and shuddered. Jessica looked at Vezka. The girl met her eyes and laughed. In Don Nolan's office, there is a photo of him with a very big pike. Don held the fish by the mouth, his hand above his head, and his brother supported the fish by the gut. The tail went down to his knees. No man on the planet has ever smiled as wide as Don Nolan did in that photograph. His cheeks push so high that it appears as if he does not have eyes, and a person can practically count all of his teeth. He'd once told Jessica that was the second proudest moment of his life. More than catching that pike, he was proudest of becoming the principal at Creekview, where he'd been for 31 years. After all, the pike missed breaking the state record by 1/4 pound. Don scratched his cheek and laced his fingers together at the top of the desk. "I've never seen anything like this," he said. His voice was smooth and soft and level. He stared at a fixed point on his desk behind the nameplate. "I've seen students tear apart rooms, but no. I haven't seen anything like this." Jessica let the clock on the wall fill the space with its tick, tick, tick. Don straightened up in his chair. "That's a lie, actually." Startled, Jessica shifted her gaze to him. He caught her alarm and nodded. "That's right. When I was a boy, we had a little girl just like Vezka.
You mean,
I mean a human disaster.
Mr. Nolan,
Don held up a hand to silence her. His face was pale. His eyes were hard, bright, and sharp. He looked nothing like the man in the fishing photograph. He looked dangerous.
Miss Swan, I know you object to my word choice, but today I do not care. A young boy, one of your students no less, was seriously injured today.
Don laced his fingers together on the desk and raised his chin.
I think it's better if we let the police handle Vezka.
Don might as well have slapped Jessica across the face.
excuse me? You're siding with Chandra?
I'll say it again. One of your students was seriously injured. Vezka needs more help than we are able to provide her.
Don's words broke Jessica's heart.
What do you mean?
She tried her hardest to keep her voice steady, but it was a challenge in the midst of betrayal.
I just need to find the right strategy. Every kid can be reached. You just have to meet them where they are. I haven't figured out where Vezka is yet.
Don sighed through his nose and laced his fingers together on the desk.
No, Jessica. I think your best option is to leave this alone. Let the police do their work. You can help Vezka once they've tried it their way with her parents.
Jessica furrowed her brow.
Her parents? But her parents are nowhere to be found. We can't even contact them, Don.
Don frowned in response and heaved in a huge sigh.
I know, but this is beyond the pale, Jessica. Even you have to admit that.
His face morphed, the features flickering, distorting.
His eyes got too far apart and then traded places with his mouth. The transformation happened in bursts, in tiny spasms. Jessica furrowed her brow as she tried to understand it. Don opened his mouth, which jolted from his forehead to his cheek and then the center of his face, and his voice distorted as he spoke.
We can help Vezka once she gets back.
Jessica's gaze fell into wary uncertainty as she turned her head away. Her right palm started to itch where the splinter had gone in during the other night's dream. Jessica scratched it absent-mindedly as she thought. At last, she asked,
What's going on, Don? Did something happen?
Don didn't move. He didn't even seem to breathe. He sat at the desk with his fingers laced together, his eyes burning holes into Jessica's soul. Then, skittering behind her like a roach, came a whisper.
Help, Vezka.
Jessica whirled around, nearly knocking over the chair. The office door faced her. Laughter, like rubber balls on a steel pan drum, echoed from beyond the door as if it were open. Dawn's chair creaked. Jessica whirled around again to see him creeping over his desk, leaning on his palms pressed flat against it as he pulled into her. His face was smooth flesh. No nose, no eyes, just a mouth. His jaw hung lower than humanly possible, frozen in a silent scream. A sound like an airy groan leaked from his throat. Screaming, Jessica jumped back as if electrified, knocking over the chair and tripping onto the floor. All around her, she heard Vezka's insane laugh as Dawn's limbs grew long and lanky, reminding her of the triple-jointed legs of a beetle. His teeth grew into long fangs, and he hopped his feet onto the desk behind his hands. His airy scream intensified, growing louder and louder, filling Jessica's ears. But all the while, the sound of Vezka's laughter never dimmed, nor did it grow. It stayed in Jessica's focus. The spot on Jessica's hand bore a sharp, lancing pain, like the massive splinter was stabbed back into it. The monster that was once Dawn launched itself off the desk and onto Jessica, knocking her out of the chair and onto the floor. Jessica writhed and wriggled beneath his weight, but the thin thing was heavier than it looked, stronger than she thought it could be. It closed and opened its mouth, sucking up heavy strings of drool with its long, pointed tongue. It stuck its tongue out into the air as if it were tasting it, like it was searching for something. Then it brought its stinking mouth close to Jessica's face. She gagged and cried out, wriggling against the creature's weight as it pressed her into the floor, but it was to no avail. She couldn't move. When Jessica inhaled to scream, she was stopped by a gag. She was trapped. Silent tears streamed down the sides of her head and her lips trembled. Her right hand felt like it was on fire.
Please,
she managed to sputter.
Please, Dawn, it's me.
The creature drew in a staggered breath and then, without moving its mouth, rasped out, "Help, Vezka." It pressed its long, thin hands harder against her limbs, opening its mouth wider to rumble a low, breathy snarl. The flesh pulverized beneath the monster's claws. The bone cracked so slowly that Jessica could almost hear it splinter. At first, she could only gasp and gaze blankly into the creature's cavernous jaws, but the pain crescendoed to such intensity that Jessica had no choice but to let free the scream that had been building in her breast. But no sound emerged. Air passed from her lungs and out her mouth. In her throat, her vocal cords rattled, her temples bulged with the pressure of blood from forcing the sound out, but no sound existed. The entire world was silent. Silent, save for the wickedly jubilant laughter. It was no longer behind her. Now it bounced from the mouth of the thing that had been Dawn. It brought its teeth to her throat. Fresh giggling, delightful and bright, the color of sunshine and fireworks, pulled Jessica out of the black. She jerked upright to find herself back in her classroom with a field of students stretched before her, laughing. One of the kids pointed at her and leaned over to whisper, not so sneakily, "She's got drool on her face." Jessica wiped her face and whirled her head around to assess her surroundings. She whipped her gaze to the board. Monday, January 23rd. Jessica felt like her brain fell out of her skull. Wasn't it just Thursday? Or was it Friday? Where's Asher? "I'm right here, Miss Swan." Jessica whirled around again. Asher raised his hand. It was fine. Jessica looked at her own palm. It ached deeply, as if from an ancient wound. She rolled her wrist and flexed the hand to release the tension, but it didn't help. Asher tilted his face away from Jessica. "Are you okay, Miss Swan? You're acting weird." Jessica closed her eyes and took a deep breath while straightening up and running her fingers through her hair. "Yes, Asher, I'm doing well. I'm sorry I fell asleep, everyone. It was unacceptable. Across from Asher, another child yelped, Miss! Vezka's pinching me! Vezka's laugh filled the room, the sound like a wind-up music box played too fast. It started small and bright but stretched too long, warping into something thin and wrong, like metal bending under too much pressure. Then the sound snapped and dropped, sank into deep, despairing pits, slowing into a cataclysmic crawl. The space between each gentle tick, tick, tick of the clock seemed longer and longer. Time itself seemed to slow, stretching into a cosmic scale. Minutes and centuries blending together into a meaningless slurry. But when Jessica looked at Vezka, the laugh returned to normal. Everything returned to normal. The clock returned to its normal tempo, and Vezka's laugh took on its usual dark, chaotic glee. With a shaky sigh, Jessica said, Vezka, please keep your hands to yourself. I think we need to go into the calming corner and fill out a reflection sheet. She'd tried this strategy before, of course. She'd tried all the strategies. The idea of a reflection sheet was to have the student recall their behavior, explore what they were feeling while they did it, and why they might have done it. Vezka had typically written obtuse or obscene responses like, I did it because I wanted to, or it felt good to hear him scream. Her responses were obviously designed to get a reaction out of Jessica. In fact, Jessica wondered if Vezka sometimes acted out so she could go into the calming corner and do exactly that. But Jessica didn't know what else to do. Maybe one day Vezka would get bored of trying to scare her and actually write something introspective. Maybe that day would be today. Jessica figured out where she'd left off in the lesson while Vezka skipped to the calming corner. Jessica picked up with multi-step word problems and had successfully guided the class to their first problem when Vezka approached with a wicked grin cutting a gash across her horse-like face. She flung the worksheet toward Jessica, who smiled and took it, then returned to the guided practice with the class. She looked at what Vezka had written while the other students practiced on their own. Name, Vezka Nevelka. Date, Thursday, January 19th. What happened? Jessica screamed, but no one believed her. How did you feel? Jessica was tired. She hadn't been sleeping very well ever since Asher got hurt. How could you change the next time? I wouldn't change a thing. I love that it's going to happen again. Vezka's handwriting was normally impossible to decipher, but now it was crisp and clean as if Jessica herself had written it in her teacher's script. In fact, it was remarkably similar to her own handwriting. Jessica looked back at Vezka, mouth agape, and then screamed. Vezka had no face, just a mouth, impossibly large, hanging open. On the wings of her rancid breath, the words leaked out, "You can't save me, Jessica." With sickening, cracking sounds like popping joints and snapping bones, Vezka's limbs grew longer and more angular. She towered above Jessica, who scrambled out of her seat, tripping as she did. The children around her burst into laughter with the chaos of rubber balls dropped onto a steel pan drum, bright the way the moon is. Vezka gripped Jessica's shoulders with her claws, pinning her legs with her sharp knees, and Jessica was reminded of her dream with Dawn. She wondered how much of it really was a dream. Vezka's talons digging into her flesh felt real. The surprising weight of the little girl pressing into her body felt real. The stink of the creature's fetid breath felt real. What, then, was illusion? The children began chanting, "Do it, Vezka! Do it, Vezka!" And the monstrous child with the stringy blonde hair opened her mouth wide. She snarled again, saliva dripping from her long, razor-like teeth onto Jessica's cheek. This was a dream. Jessica knew enough psychology to know that this was a dream manifesting her anxieties about Vezka. It mortified her to think that subconsciously she saw the little girl as a monster, but she could save her. "Please, Vezka, let me help you." The featureless face curled its mouth into the closest approximation of a smile, angular at the sides, pressing the smooth flesh into tight, multitudinous wrinkles. The tongue snaked out from between the teeth, long, pointy at its tapered end, with barbs ridging the sides. Vezka pressed the rough sandpaper flesh against the hollow of Jessica's throat and pressed it until it covered the milky skin to her chin. The barbs latched into Jessica's neck, each puncture like a needle. Jessica struggled against them, but she felt herself getting weaker, drowsier. The barbs siphoned something from Jessica. It flowed out of her body, fast and smooth like soda through a straw, and with every ounce that Vezka drank, Jessica's strength dimmed. "Vezka," she wheezed. "Please." In response, the creature drained faster. It didn't take long before Jessica passed out. She lay in the darkness of unconscious for what could have been days. Jessica didn't know anymore. So little existed in that space that she wasn't even sure if she truly existed. There was nothing to sense or experience, no external stimuli, just darkness. Jessica's mind floated, untethered by mortal coil, through the vast abyss. It was peaceful. When she awoke to the sound of laughing children mixed with some uncertain voices, she almost yearned for that numb solitude. Pain traced up her arm in broad pinches. She opened bleary eyes, groaning, and reached for the pain. Her hands met smooth plastic. Jessica's eyes focused on the object. A clothespin. Clothespins lined the length of her entire arm. The dull plastic teeth dug at the surface of her skin, trying to bury deeper, but pressing far enough that the skin around them turned black and purple, swollen with yellow smears. How long have I been asleep?" She gazed around the classroom, searching for answers, so dazed by the question that she didn't even take the clothespins off. A tiny voice answered, "You fell asleep when we started doing multiplication, Miss Swan." It was Asher. He held his pencil with both hands, the tip in one and the eraser in the other, and his hand was whole. Jessica clenched her teeth so hard they groaned in her ears. She took a deep, shuddering breath in and tried not to cry. She couldn't cry. It's not good to cry in front of the children. Asher dropped his eyes to the pencil, then looked back up at Jessica.
Miss Swan, are you okay?
Her hands shook. She looked at the papers in front of her and then nodded.
Yes. Yes, I'm fine.
She looked back up at the students with a big smile on her face.
Now, where were we?
She asked as she removed the clothespins one by one from her arm. Vezka was nowhere to be seen. Another voice, emboldened by Asher's responses, replied,
We were doing word problems.
Yes, Jessica said with a plastic smile.
Yes, of course.
She picked up the worksheet in front of her and turned around to the board. She stopped. It read, Today is Friday, January 20th. Jessica gulped. Her hand quaked. She didn't know what day it was supposed to be. Clearing her throat, she looked at the worksheet, raising her marker to the board.
Okay. If Vezka...
She rubbed her eyes. Vezka's name was written on the worksheet's problem. There could be no doubt. Jessica started again.
If Vezka has 5 apples and eats 2, how many does she have left?
Asher's hand shot up.
3,
he said.
Yes, that's right.
Everything was fine. She just had a terrible dream, that was all. Jessica wrote the numbers on the board and smiled. This time it bubbled up from her naturally. It felt right.
Vezka would have 3 apples left. Now,
she read from the worksheet again.
If Vezka had 10 teeth and takes...
The words on the page blurred, and Jessica was unsure if it was her sight or the ink itself. Eagerly, one of the students asked,
How many teeth did Vezka take, Miss Swan?
She turned around to see the children with their mouths open, their fingers laced together on their desks. Vezka, wielding a pair of pliers, held the student's head steady while she twisted her gaze over her shoulder to leer at Jessica with a gleefully menacing smile. To Jessica's left, a child asked,
How many teeth, Miss Swan?
Compelled by an unseen force, Jessica read from the worksheet again.
If Vezka has 10 teeth and takes 3 from Gabriel...
Vezka threw back her head and laughed. Then she clamped the pliers onto one of the student's teeth and twisted. The rest of the class sat still and perfect, mouths open and waiting. Vezka ripped out another tooth, giggling. Gabriel stared blankly ahead, unmoving, making no attempt to cry out or stop Vezka.
3! That's 3!
Jessica continued reading the problem.
And she takes 7 from Asher?
Not even the unseen force could make her finish the sentence. Her vocal cords faltered and the words stopped in her throat. The class finished for her, their voices rising in cheerful chorus.
How many teeth does she have in all?
Vezka was upon him. The glee in her eyes was unmatched. She couldn't be happier. Lacing her fingers through her hair, she yanked Asher's head back. He tried to protect his teeth with his tongue.
Hey,
Gabriel cried, spitting blood as he spoke.
No fair. That's cheating.
Vezka giggled again and nodded her head, casting Gabriel a devious, conspiratorial look. She tried gaining purchase on one of his teeth one more time, but Asher blocked the bloody pliers with his tongue once more, desperately pushing back the metal. He sobbed in flat, open vowels, begging incomprehensibly. Vezka caught his tongue with the pliers. Asher's eyes met Jessica's, begging her to make it stop, but she couldn't move. It didn't seem like he could either. He could only cry and scream. Vezka tugged at Asher's tongue while making a sound that reminded Jessica of a chainsaw revving. She did it once, twice, thrice, 4 times. Asher screamed on the 5th. Blood poured out of his mouth and down his chin. Then Vezka set to work on his teeth. The class counted as she yanked them out by the root.
1, 2, 3.
Where Asher's face wasn't bloody, it was red from the screaming, dimpled with agony.
4, 5, 6.
Vezka brought her face close to Asher's, the pliers still hovering close to his lips, and she opened her mouth. A long, spiny tongue unfolded from a neat spiral in her jaws and licked blood from his chin. She flicked her wrist.
7.
It's a nightmare. It's only a nightmare, Jessica told herself. Asher is fine. He's just fine. Vezka turned to Jessica, brandishing the pliers, the tongue eagerly lolled out of her mouth. The class roared,
10 plus 7 is 17.
One of the boys to Jessica's right called out.
Let's see how many teeth Miss Swan has.
Like a frog's, Vezka's tongue lashed out. The barbs on its edges buried themselves into Jessica's throat, and she felt her life draining away again. The children said in chorus,
You can't help me, Jessica. Who's going to help you?
Jessica woke in her bed to the scream of her alarm clock. She was drenched in sweat. Covering her face with her hands, she shook and wept. Was this another dream? How would she know if it was? The damp tears streaking her face felt real. The pillow beneath her head felt real. The sheets over her body felt real, too. The answer was that she couldn't know. That was the greatest terror of them all. It was impossible to distinguish truth from mental fiction. She could only know when it was too late. Jessica thought about the school. She thought about those halls where, in her nightmares, she had been faced with monsters. The dreams had been so real that she dreaded going back. She covered her head with the sheets and squeezed her eyes shut, considering calling in sick for the day, but a thought traveled through her heart. What about Asher? It was no secret that the boy was the focal point of Vezka's wrath. Would a substitute be able to protect him? Jessica barely could. She thought about her nightmare and shuddered. What kinds of terrors awaited the poor boy if she left? She took a deep breath. The police had taken Vezka. Surely she'd be out of school for a few days. Without Vezka, there was no threat. The school was a safe place. It was her happy place. She'd be okay if she went. Jessica rolled out of bed and took a shower. She tried to let the water wash away her anxiety. She imagined it cleaning away her fear. As she dried herself off with the towel, she felt like it had almost worked. She stared into her own eyes reflected in the mirror, peering deep within them as if attempting to divine answers to her deepest questions from them. She reflected on what she just thought before getting into the shower. For the first time in her 10 years teaching, she found a student that she truly didn't like. It broke her heart. She felt sick. Jessica looked at the palm of her right hand. It ached deeply, like the veins themselves were bruised and raw. She flexed it open and closed, rolled it on her wrist and shook it out. That's it. That's all I have to do. Just shake it off. Jessica splashed water on her face, brushed her teeth and hair, then got dressed. She went to work. On the drive there, she didn't listen to the radio, nor did she play Sin Bandera or any other music. She simply drove as if in a daze. Attendance was sparse at Creekview Elementary. Almost all of the students were out. I have to admit, Mrs. Brown said while the spattering of students filtered in from morning recess, it's kinda nice for it to be so quiet. Jessica shrugged. After what happened yesterday, I'm not surprised. Mrs. Brown gave her a strange look. After what happened yesterday? Jessica blinked. With Asher, she replied. Mrs. Brown checked Jessica's temperature. Girl, you feeling okay? It's just the flu. Asher's one of the few kids here. As if on cue, the boy ran up to Jessica and gave her a hug. Look, he said, baring his teeth at her and pointing at his mouth. I lost a tooth yesterday, Miss Swan. Jessica's blood ran cold. That's amazing, Asher. It felt like she was saying it from 10,000 yards away. She thought about her dream from the night before. Asher hugged her again. I'm so glad you're all right, Miss Swan. I had a really bad dream about you last night. Jessica stroked his head. It's okay, buddy. I'm all right. Asher looked up at her. Are you sure? Jessica nodded. I'm sure. Because Vezka knew about my nightmare, and she said it was going to come true. Vezka? But Vezka's back? Miss Swan, are you sure you're all right? Jessica ran her fingers through her hair. Yeah, she managed to say. Yeah, I'm great. Asher started to cry. Both Mrs. Brown and Jessica leaned in, each putting a hand on a different shoulder and cooing concerned questions. What's wrong? What's wrong, buddy? He managed to sputter out. It's going to happen. It's going to happen just like she said. Mrs. Brown shook her head and bent to Asher's level, placing a hand on his cheek. What's going to happen, sweetie? Who told you? But Jessica knew that she knew who it was already. It was obvious who Asher was talking about. There could only be one person. He glanced between the two of them with confused, tear-soaked eyes and said, Vezka. Vezka said my dream was going to come true, and it is. That's why you're so sad, Miss Swan. You had nightmares last night, too. Asher rubbed his eyes. The sobbing came harder and louder now. You dreamt about my tooth, didn't you? You already knew I'd lost it. Asher covered his face with his hands and bawled. Mrs. Swan, I don't want you to die. Jessica knelt beside Asher and put a hand on his cheek. Hey now. Look at me. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Asher didn't stop crying. You promise? Yeah, I promise. The words calmed Asher down a bit. He snuffled and gasped, but he seemed to be grounded again. Okay, but remember, you promised. As if sensing something, he glanced down the hall toward the door leading to the playground and then cowered. Vezka strolled toward them, slack-jawed and vacant-faced. She turned her face to Asher and her eyes slowly followed suit as if floating freely inside her skull. and then she looked at Jessica. Then she smiled. A devilish grin crept across her face, and her normally empty expression brightened with wicked enthusiasm. She kept walking right past Asher and the two teachers, entering Mrs. Brown's room. Jessica raced after her. She dropped a hand on Vezka's shoulder and whirled her around. "What are you playing at?" she snarled. A collective gasp fluttered through the students who'd already entered. They'd never seen a teacher put hands on a student. It was unthinkable. "What do you want? Leave Asher alone." Mrs. Brown grabbed Jessica and pulled her away. "Miss Swan," she said, "that type of behavior is unacceptable. Do better in front of the kids." Jessica stepped away from Vezka and stared at her hands. What was she doing? She wasn't in control of herself. The pain in her hand was intense, throbbing worse than it had when she'd gotten the splinter at the house. And she was so tired. It felt worse than if it were just sleeplessness. Jessica was accustomed to long nights. She'd spent long nights filling out paperwork and grades. But this was different. Worst of all, she felt like she just didn't care. She still cared for Asher, that much was apparent, but the others? The desire she had to save Vezka, to heal Vezka, had all but vanished. And her other students? Right now, as she stepped away from Mrs. Brown's classroom and stalked, head down and jaw clenched, she could barely remember their names. Once, she had all of their academic goals memorized. At one point, Jessica could enumerate their pets, their Roblox handles and favorite games, even their schedules after school. But now, she didn't give a damn. Jessica thought about the women at the beginning of the semester, when everything had started. How they'd congregated by the bus loop more out of a sense of duty and necessity than genuine affection for the children. They cared about the kids. Jessica knew this, but their cups were empty. They had little left to give. Even though it wasn't much, they still gave what they had. In her classroom, she peered at the pale, round faces staring at her. They stared back with the same blankness. She didn't know how much more she had to give them. Jessica had trouble staying awake after that. Her eyelids fluttered, threatening to close without her permission, and once, while students were working on math worksheets, she slipped into another dream. Jessica drove her car through the woods as she had the day she'd discovered the house. Gravel crunched beneath her tires as she inched along. She was being summoned. She was being called. An eerie glow seemed to emanate from the house, not as light but as energy. It defined the house's lines and the edges in the dim forest. Jessica stood before the house. Her palm ached with a deep, dull throb. She didn't bother flexing it. She knew it wouldn't do any good. Something was in the house. Something was waiting for her. She ascended the creaking porch steps. They seemed to gently push her, encouraging her up. The door was ajar. From the crack, Jessica heard whispers. "What do you want from me?" she called into the void. With a creak, the door swung gently forward. The energy inside seemed to beckon to Jessica, promising secrets, promising answers. Reaching out her aching hand, she opened the door. It led to her classroom. or rather, a version of her classroom. It was old and outdated, with an overhead projector beside the green chalkboard. The carpet appeared new and the desks were solid wood. Jessica took a few steps forward and then spun around, looking for her car in the world outside the house. But it was gone. Not even the door to her classroom remained. Just a solid cinder block wall. She turned back around at the sound of chalk against porcelain. Don stood there, with a hand in his pocket, writing the alphabet above a line he'd drawn near the top of the big green board. His handwriting was neat and precise. Perfect teacher's script.
When you become a principal, he began, people forget that you used to be a teacher.
He finished the alphabet, and then, beneath the line he wrote, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
I started out in this room. I even learned in this room.
The next pangram he wrote was bizarre. Jaded zombies acted quaintly but kept driving their oxen forward.
I've been at Creekview my entire life. This place is a part of me. Or maybe you could say I'm a part of it, like furniture.
He moved down to the next line and wrote a new sentence, but this time his handwriting slipped. It wasn't as clean and precise as it had been in the previous two. Whispered jokes vanquish my exciting but troubled, lazy, quaking dreams.
No one's been here as long as me. Inevitably, they leave.
Don's hand shook as he wrote now. Quiet minds vex popular teachers when jumbled dark zephyrs laugh. He said,
I've seen things here, Jessica.
I've seen some beautiful things, and I've seen horrible things. He was halfway down the board at this point, and his scrawl was unrecognizable from the tight, neat loops of teacher's script at the top of the board. Pack my box with 6 broken quills. Just watch empty veins freeze.
I've seen Vezka before. Not as Vezka, of course. I told you I've only seen something like her once before in my life. It was when I was a child. My favorite teacher had a transfer student right after winter break. Glazed, watchful eyes quietly judge zealous teachers prior to marking next victims. He was awful. He broke things, threw tantrums. Back then, you could spank kids, wash their mouths out with soap, but nothing worked for him. He lived for running the teacher ragged.
Vexed by Vezka, quick, zealous teachers jump from waking nightmares daily.
In the end, he hurt a little girl. He hurt her badly. So badly she had to go to the hospital in the next town. She ended up dying of an infection she caught there.
Now Don's handwriting was so illegible that Jessica couldn't even make out the words. He traced frantic squiggles across the board.
The teacher never recovered. She retired, but not before a breakdown.
He placed the chalk down and wiped his hand off on his pants. The chalk dust that didn't leave a handprint on his pant leg floated to the ground like dense mist.
She left. She was never seen from again.
Eleanor Wright?
Don nodded.
I loved Mrs. Wright.
Jessica took a step back.
What are you implying, Don?
He shrugged his shoulders.
I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what's going to happen.
He raised his chin high, exposing his throat, and ran a hand over his Adam's apple.
I'm sure you've noticed what she does to you by now. I'm sure you've felt it.
Don lowered his head and hand, grimacing.
You know what she's doing to you, right?
Jessica had her suspicions, but they were ridiculous. She didn't want to say them aloud. They felt foolish. But before she could stop them, the words tumbled out of her mouth.
She's draining me, isn't she?
Don nodded. Jessica scoffed and crossed her arms.
So you're saying Vezka isn't a little girl, but
What, a monster? A vampire? Dawn shrugged.
No, not exactly. She's older than anything like that. She's ancient and powerful. You can't stop her, Jessica. Nothing you can do will stop her.
But... Tears stung Jessica's eyes and she grit her teeth. But what about the other children? Who's going to protect them? Shaking his head, Don grimaced again.
You're just one person, Jessica. You're only human. You're just a teacher. You can only do so much.
But it's my job!
You're a great teacher, Jessica. But like I said, you're just a teacher. There's only so much you can do.
Dawn turned around to face the chalkboard again and resumed drawing on the green surface. He drew a square and then bifurcated it with a cross. It was a window. He beckoned to her, offering another sad smile.
Come here. I want to show you something.
She approached, and Dawn knocked on the window panes he'd drawn. The lines wriggled like disturbed worms, and when they settled, the green board inside the pane shimmered, glistening first with faint light and then becoming transparent.
Take a look.
Through the window stood a jungle gym with an orange, sun-spoiled tube slide and a wide, faded rope ladder. It was designed to look like a pirate ship. It was surrounded by red wood chips. Behind it stood a pair of old basketball hoops towering above a rectangle of blistered asphalt. Jessica knew this place well. It was the Creekview Elementary playground. Spring storm clouds hung overhead, coating the sky in woolly gray. Like a tiny recording, she heard thunder roll. Movement on the jungle gym attracted her attention. A child appeared in the mouth of the slide. Another stood at the top. They were the only bodies on the entire playground. Asher stood up from the wood chips and faced the jungle gym, looking up at Vezka.
Something terrible is going to happen, Dawn explained. You can't do anything to stop it. You need to know that.
He put a hand on her shoulder and Jessica jumped.
No matter what you do, it's going to happen.
At the top of the jungle gym, Vezka's head snapped to the side, her mouth open in a silent, pained scream, her eyes consumed by their own whites, biceps pressed against her sides, her arms bent at the elbows at sharp angles so that her palms faced the sky, and her fingers curled into angular claws. And then she started to change. Her jaw extended forward with a jarring crack. Her head elongated backwards. Her fingers stretched and her nails grew long, pointed and sharp. She roared.
Remember, there's nothing you can do about it.
Vezka leaped off the jungle gym on to Asher. Jessica awoke to pain along her arm and anxious murmurs. Binder clips lined her arm, pinching the flesh into bruised gray piles. Vezka threw back her head and laughed. When she was finished, one of the girls asked,
Miss Swan, are you okay?
Jessica cleared her throat, and with a quaking hand, she removed the binder clips from her arm. Snap, snap, snap. Yes, she managed. Yes, Lily, I'm fine. One of the boys interjected.
The recess bell rang. Can we leave?
Without thinking, she said, Yes, of course, go right ahead. And they were off, streaming out the door as fast as they could. That was when Jessica's dream came to her in realization. She whirled her head to look out the tall, segmented window. The jungle gym stood beneath a woolly sky. Her heart jumped into her throat as she saw Asher at the top of the slide. Vezka came up behind him. Jessica scrambled to the window and pounded on it, beating it and screaming. The children didn't notice, except for Vezka. She waved, smiling menacingly at Jessica. And then she pushed Asher off the slide. Before she even saw his body hit the ground, Jessica was off running to the playground. When she arrived at the jungle gym, blood pooled around Asher's head like a halo. He'd hit a rock. Asher didn't move. He didn't cry out. Jessica's hands trembled. Her knees buckled and nearly dropped her to the ground. She heard herself say, "It's just a dream." But she didn't fully process that she'd said it. It may as well have been spoken at the other end of a tin can line 1,000,000 miles away. Jessica woke up at her desk. She felt like she hadn't slept in weeks. On the other side of the tall windows, darkness dominated. With the light from inside the classroom, she couldn't see through them. She could only see herself reflected in the glass. She didn't recognize the woman before her. Jessica had always looked young for her 35 years, but this woman looked like a weathered 40. She jumped at a knock, rapping against her door. It was Dawn. He looked so old, a frail skeleton clinging to life.
How are you doing? You know you don't get paid overtime, right?
Hands shaking, Jessica's mouth went dry. What was she doing here? Wasn't she just at the playground?
It's starting to snow. Going to be a cold winter break.
Jessica looked at her laptop screen. It was IEP paperwork. She remembered now. She was getting a transfer student. Dawn smiled sadly at her.
I guess you heard. Another family moved to Creekview. Can you believe it? Doesn't happen very often. People usually leave. But not you. Not me. We've been here a long, long time, Jessica.
What? Jessica stammered. What are you talking about? What happened to Asher, to Vezka? Dawn gave her a quizzical look.
Asher?
Vezka? Recognition crossed his weazened face and he snapped his fingers.
Oh, right. Those kids from your first year here. You remember, don't you? She disappeared after the incident.
Jessica slowly turned her head to Dawn.
Dawn nodded forlornly. With the boy, yes.
He tilted his head toward her and put his hands in his pockets.
You okay, Jessica? Why are you bringing up ancient history? Feeling nostalgic with the holidays coming up?
I was... She stared at the document on her computer screen. Dawn ran a hand over his bald head.
It does feel pretty similar, doesn't it? Kind of like deja vu.
He stared at the ground away from Jessica and heaved a huge sigh.
Well, let's hope things don't turn out the same way.
They stood in the silence for a while, letting the clock fill the space between them. Dawn cleared his throat and scratched the back of his head.
I won't set the alarm on my way out. You should know how to do that by now.
He pointed at her and offered her a weak smile.
Don't burn yourself out, Jessica.
Then added as he was turning away,
Kids these days will do that for you.
Something unsettled Jessica about the statement. She rubbed her eyes. She was exhausted, As Dawn's footsteps faded away, she squinted at the transfer student's IEP. Nothing unusual. No noted behavior issues, but severe academic disabilities. He'd take a lot of work. Vezka Nevelka, 8 years old. Nezvek. Jessica liked the name. We'll be great friends, Nezvek. This year will be different. The letters on the screen trembled, and Jessica raised her hands off the desk, wondering if she jostled the laptop. But their lines trembled faster and faster until they convulsed on the screen. Then they moved. They rearranged themselves before her. Vezka Nevelka became Vezka Nevelka. From the vent above her desk, she heard a laugh. It was chaotic, like dropping a handful of rubber balls onto a steel pan drum, and it was bright the way the moon is, dark except for light reflected.
Thank you for sharing my nightmares and helping me carry the grief. If you enjoyed the show, please share your favorite nightmare with a friend or family member. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments below. You can also support my work by joining my Patreon. You'll get early access to episodes and exclusive insights into each story. You can also buy my books on Amazon. Thank you again for sharing this time with me. Good night.